Welcome to Entrepreneurs, Executives, and Eccentrics, a podcast dedicated to the stories, strategies, and secrets of remarkable individuals. Join us as we engage in enlightening conversations with intriguing entrepreneurs, accomplished executives, and fascinating eccentrics, exploring their journeys, triumphs, and the unconventional wisdom that has shaped their success. In this episode, we sit down with Alexander Hejazi, founder and CEO of Placement, a company reshaping how brands use kiosks and unattended retail. Alexander shares the story of starting with beach gear rentals, navigating a pandemic pivot, and building a platform that connects consumer brands to new distribution channels. We explore how he approached risk, learned from early challenges, and turned constant adaptation into a long-term strategy.
Alexander, welcome. Tell me who you are and what you do.
Scott, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Alex Hejazi. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Placement. The last 5-6 years, I've been involved in the kiosk industry. Coming from a background in finance, I started my career in Wells Fargo. I didn't think I would be building lockers and deploying lockers and involved in this space, but here we are. But in essence, what Placement does is we are a conduit for any brand, any CPG company to access kiosks and unattended retail systems across the country. So if you can envision a Amazon locker, maybe some of the smart vending machines you see at the airport, we enable brands to access those systems to sell and sample products while capturing incredible data.
So you created this thing, right? These mechanisms, and it sounds like you also developed a code, right? That actually that does all that. How the heck did you get into this from finance? Like, how do you go from what was the line in the sand? You're like, oh, there's an opportunity there. I'm going to go quit my job and go take up. How'd that work exactly?
Well, it's funny you use that analogy because it was quite literally a line in the sand. So the inception behind this all was back in 2018. I was living in Chicago. I graduated, and in the Midwest, you have really 3 months out of the year that you can go outside and enjoy yourself. So we're at parks, we're at beaches, and what I realized is, my apartment that I just moved into, I didn't have any of the things that I wanted to use when I got to the beach or to the park. I didn't have basketballs, footballs, chairs, umbrellas, speakers, things of that nature. And what around that time, what we saw was a variety of, bike sharing systems pop up. Bird scooters had just pop up.
What year is this? What year is this?
2017, 2018.
I would venture to say that's the birth of the sharing economy. Happened around that kind of time period, right? Okay.
Gig economy, sharing economy, It all started to come to a head. And our thesis was, hey, I see these bike share stations all over the city. Bird scooters are all over the city. What if we had this public network of kiosks that allowed people to rent, sport tech and leisure equipment? If you're at a beach, you could get chairs and umbrellas. If you're at an apartment, you could rent VR systems and vacuums. So that's actually how it started. We started building a kiosk network where people could rent sport tech and leisure equipment. We were putting these at public parks and beaches, city of Chicago, North Avenue Beach. We were at Marriott hotels. We were in some apartments. And that was, we finally kind of got some stuff on the ground in 2019, and things were going well. We were expanding. We had a bunch of different use cases, across cities, apartments, hotels. And 6 months later, the pandemic hits. So that's, threw a wrench in the initial business plan, which was, essentially this public locker network. And, consumer product rental was out of the window. But what we had was a inroad to apartment complexes. We had a kiosk system, and we essentially just developed a package management system because people were ordering tons of stuff online. Apartments were overburdened with packages. There was no property management staff in these apartment complexes. So we took our core tech of rental tech, combined it with package management software, and had a new product. We had the first kiosk ever that was, a versatile kiosk infrastructure where people could rent.
You pivot because your original thesis, oh no, we're going to rent beach equipment. We're going to rent whatever you can rent on the beach, right? And then the world ends, kind of, sort of. And then when you pivoted, you basically, it's a similar customer, right? Maybe a different upstream provider of whoever's actually selling the thing. And you're just kind of moving around it, to That's incredible. So you successfully pivoted, but I bet there's a lot of stuff that had to happen, right, for that to work, right?
I mean, you got to learn how to sell an entirely new product. You got to build an entirely new product. Like it's a whole different ball game. And it wasn't the only pivot. There's several pivots, and I think that's kind of the it coincides with life. There's a lot of times where you gotta find a new route, and that's what we did. So yeah, 2020 was definitely a defining year for us, where we expanded on our initial thesis, and we were able to create a new product, started going to multifamily apartment complexes. Essentially, our value prop was, we went to property managers at these apartment complexes and we said, hey, you guys are already buying these kiosks for package management. Let's, we have the same system, but we also can enable your residents to rent, a variety of products. So we're adding and we're amenitizing, that cost center. So we're turning what was formerly a cost center into this beautiful amenity for properties. And that really stuck. We doubled down on that, ended up, essentially bringing brands into the ecosystem, because, really what I've used as our North Star from day one was, how can we maximize asset utilization? How can this kiosk be used for more than just a package management system? How can we bring in other players into this ecosystem to lower the cost burden for our main customer, which is apartment complexes?
But now your distribution, right? So if I'm Tide, as an example, right, and I want to expand my distribution of my Tide washing whatever, right? I would go to a store. Now you're a brand new category. You created a brand new category for distribution of whatever the hell that you think that may sell at those places.
Absolutely. And so that kind of goes into the, one of the, maybe the second or the third pivot that we had. So, if I was to kind of give the timeline, 2019, we were sport tech and leisure equipment rental. 2020, we added package management to that tech stack. 2021, we add vending and product sampling into that tech stack. So we have this, what's called a full access hub, where, there's a kiosk in your apartment. You can get your package, you can buy products, you can sample new products, you can rent items. And brands are paying for this access in this ecosystem because it's such a valuable target audience.
Meanwhile, you're furiously typing new code, right? Furiously, someone's having to they're like, oh, well, fire truck, this is completely different. Well, scrap that. Let's go write some new code to have it, because you're probably having to integrate with other people's APIs and such, right?
Always. And luckily my CTO and co-founder, Mustafa, who I've known for 15 years at this point, is the wizard behind it all. He's a self-taught hardware engineer, software engineer, dropped out of school to support his family when he was like 14, and is just an absolute wizard. And he's been the driving force behind all of the technology that we've built over the years. And, even in 2022, the story didn't end there. So we essentially separated or created a whole new entity, because, up until 2022, so from 2019 to 2022, about 3-4 years, our core business and our only business was, how can we put more kiosks on the ground, our own kiosks, developing our hardware, selling our hardware, developing software to power these systems. But in 2022, that's when things changed. And the reason is that we saw so much, activity in the kiosk space. And when I say kiosk, I use this as a term for unattended retail, essentially any ecosystem that could have automated and unattended commerce take place. So vending machines, smart lockers for packages, smart lockers for asset management, just a bunch of different use cases. And in 2022, we kind of had a light bulb go off, and we said, hey, we don't need, we can make money from other people's kiosks. We don't need to only deploy our own hardware. And that's when placement was born. The initial entity, was called BallBox, and it really served well when we were renting, sport footballs and soccer balls from a kiosk. But eventually, we transitioned to placement, and placement really became this, almost a pure software play, where we are a plugin for any kiosk. And on the brand side, brands can use the placement platform to get their products into thousands and thousands of
distribution. You're offering distribution. Yeah,
exactly. Apartments, hotels, airports, office buildings. And we essentially became a channel for what, a lot of folks in the CPG space call, alt distribution, or unattended retail. So that would be, without going through the bumps and all the bumps in the roads and kind of giving the high level. That's the solution, or that's how we came from BallBox to placement, or how BallBox transitioned to what is placement today.
So somehow you will BallBox into life, or you will it into being a thing, right? What was your first dollar made with that?
So
You remember the day you're like, oh my God, there's $1 or $5 or $1,000 in my account. Like, what's that look like?
I have three different I guess situations where I would consider we made our first dollar. So the first dollar before we even got investment was a POC. When I had this idea, I was going to investors and saying, hey, I think this would be a great idea. I had our deck, was going through a fundraising process. Everyone came back and said, hey, like, get a proof of concept on the ground. And at the time, I didn't, I couldn't manufacture and build a kiosk. So our proof of concept was me with a wagon walking down the beach, North Avenue Beach in Chicago on a summer day with footballs, volleyballs, a bunch of things that people could rent. And I'm lugging this wagon through the sand on the beach and essentially asking people if they wanted to rent a volleyball. And that was the first time we made $1. It was before the company was incorporated. That was our POC. And that was just to see, would people rent stuff at the beach? And that's like the V0 of our first dollar.
The answer is yes, right? The answer was yes. People needed stuff, right? That they necessarily didn't have with them.
My wagon was empty after an hour. And I was like, oh man, I mean, $40. I might just start doing this on the weekend on a regular basis. Like this has some feet. And so that would be what I consider our first dollar. The first dollar we ever made once the company was incorporated, once we had our prototype, our first kiosk, which was in Fort Lauderdale. It was at this place called Beach Place. It was this, it's in Fort Lauderdale, public, like kind of outdoor mall right on the beach. And we were setting up and testing our kiosk, and we just had installed it the night before. Someone comes up and said, hey, can I rent something from this kiosk? And we're on the back end, like trying to make sure things are working. We're like, yeah, just give us like 2 seconds. And that was the first real dollar. It was a couple. It was a mother and a daughter who had a layover in Fort Lauderdale, and they wanted to store their bags in our kiosk, rent some beach gear, and it was beautiful seeing the entire premise just play out naturally while we were still getting things set up. Yeah. So that was
that's awesome. Okay, and then there's a third time then.
Yeah, that was the second real dollar. The third time was when we actually sold our hardware, because the initial iteration of BallBox, the business model was we would manufacture, deploy the kiosk and the hardware, and we would generate revenue. It was a B2C model, so we would generate revenue from rentals. The third real dollar I would consider us making was when we actually sold our kiosk. And it's funny how things in life all like piece together. So the first deal we ever closed, where we sold our hardware, came from a pitch competition. I was at a pitch competition. I really didn't want to go to it. I didn't think it would be beneficial. One of our investors, her name's Michelle. She's very dear to me. She's amazing. Larry Slabs. If anybody's listening, if you have a startup, go and apply to their accelerator. They're amazing. But she convinced me to go to this pitch competition. I, semi-reluctantly went, and I met somebody at that pitch competition that was in the multifamily development space. They were in the student housing space. And, before I knew it, we ended up selling $80,000 of kiosks to a apartment complex. And this is kind of going through that transition when COVID hit, and, our rental business was really not viable. When COVID hit in March, we didn't have a business. But with that being said, we, essentially we got into a new business, which was package management, through that pitch competition. So that was the third time that we really made $1. And that's when life changed. So those are three very near and dear moments to my heart.
Okay. So it is my humble opinion that typically the first dollar and the first employee is kind of like the burning your ships at the shore of the new world, right? Like you're like, yeah, we're stuck here now. We're doing this. What was
Exactly.
that first employ? Because there's all this, like we were talking about earlier, there's all this responsibility that goes with having an employee. Their family is now your problem. When it comes to payroll, their insurance is now your problem when it comes to that kind of stuff. Who was that first employee and why'd you hire them?
Absolutely. So first employee goes back to, I would say I would say that my first employee was my co-founder, which might be kind of like antithetical, but the way that things panned out for us was, my co-founder who I started this company with, he joined us very early on. Essentially I said, hey, I have this idea, can you build it? And he's like, yeah, let's see what we can do, let's give it a whirl. And next thing you know, we're a year into this thing. We got kiosks deployed, and no longer was a side project. It was like, hey, like I have a full-time job, but I can't manage this doing this on the side with. Like, what can we do here? And that was really, when I consider like kind of our first hire, our first employee, because all of a sudden, this kind of side project and this idea became a living, breathing entity. My co-founder, as a wife, as kids, had another kid on the way. So it became more than just me and a side project and a couple angel investors who wanted to see what could happen. This really became a living, breathing entity where it's not only me, it's other people who have families to feed and are making career changes to pursue this vision that was in its inception, right? So that's what I consider kind of our first hire, and there's been many more since then, but that was all. I'll always remember that as a very pivotal moment.
If you could go back, is there I mean, if you could give some advice to someone who's starting a company or thinking about it, do you have anything that just broadly that you learned and that you kind of now it seems obvious, but it wasn't then?
I think that there's a bunch of narratives, whether you're bootstrapping or whether you're raising venture, taking the venture route, where a lot of VCs, for example, or a lot of investors, they don't want to invest in someone who's not all in, who hasn't already burned the boats at the shore. And I think it's counterintuitive, to kind of dive, jump off the ship at a very early age before you're a very early stage before you're able to know that, hey, you're generating revenue, because there's 2, 3, 4. We just discussed 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pivots. And if I could go back and do anything differently, it might have been to, stay in my full-time job a little longer than I did, so that I wasn't either A, using burn when we were going through a pandemic. Obviously, pandemics, hopefully, once in 100 years type scenario. So hopefully any founders who are listening to this don't have to relive that.
Right.
But, I would say that it's really beneficial to continue, or to have supplemental sources of income while you're still trying to figure out if you have a business and how you can make money. Once you know how you can make money, and once you know that it's repeatable and it's scalable, that's when I think you go all in. And I think there needs to be a lot less pressure on, early entrepreneurs to, jump off the boat with no life jacket and swim. That being said, there's definitely a lot of benefits to it. There's no plan B. Once you do that, once you do that, there's no plan B. So you really give yourself no option except to succeed, which maybe it has its own benefits, but a couple gray hairs come along with it, and I think could be maybe I'd have some less gray hair if I stayed on my full-time job a little longer.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's this kind of, it's this really big deal. But here's the thing, you do have a plan B. It's called a pivot. And I think that the thing that I've learned from this, just talking to you, is that your baby may be ugly. And it's okay if a pandemic comes by and makes your baby really ugly. There's other options that will keep the idea and the dream alive. You really have to be open to the possibility that the first idea isn't going to fly because of the timing or whatever. I mean, I have read a billion business books, and it feels like every single one of them talks about the third pivot is the one that made the money, right? It was never the original idea. It was, well, I
100%.
started out as, a packaging company, and next thing you know, I'm UPS or whatever.
Exactly.
It's some other. It's that pivot is what keeps things going. I also like. I think that what you said about having the job, still having the job, I think that's important, right?
Yep.
It's important to be able to, when you finally do kind of, you do make the decision to quit, right? That you've already got a trickle, a modicum of income coming in, so you can make it this kind of an 8 to 10 hour a day job.
Yep.
Anybody's listening, it's, be smart about it. You don't have to go bankrupt. They don't have to. You don't have to go off the rails. Just be smart about how you're kind of going to plan, and but just know when you hire someone, they're in your care. Right?
You're absolutely right. And
So,
there, when you have responsibility for other people than yourself, like, there's things that take priority. There's risk. Your risk tolerance has to evolve, and that yeah, that threshold, that pain threshold has to go real high, because there was times, we had a rental business during COVID, or when COVID hit. That was our business, and we didn't make money for 6-7 months until we figured out how to build a whole new product and business. And when you don't make money and you still have to spend money, that your bank balance decreases, and there's there's credit cards that you can take out, there's working lines of capital that you can take out, and some of those might be some nail biting decisions, but if you burn the boat and you're all in, those are things that you got to do. So we've been there's times where we had $2,000 in the bank, $60,000 on a credit card, no idea where we were going to get our next dollar from, but we knew we were going to get it somewhere, and that keeps you that definitely keeps you on your toes. And
the thing though is that your platform, your thesis, or not your business thesis, but the platform is what kind of stayed, and then the thesis was spinning around the thing that you guys made. It's a box. It has a lock on it. It can be opened in certain ways. Sometimes you pay for it. Sometimes it's a whatever. And you just kept kind of spinning around that platform, kind of as you went through space. And, that wasn't a bunch of wasted time, because you still had the box. You still had the mechanism to open the box. You still had the code that made it happen. It's a matter of changing it, the kind of thesis around it. That's awesome. And I'm I'm a little enamored by the product you made, because it's rad. It really is rad. And now you're becoming the software go-to software for this type of thing, right? And that's where and maybe that's where the real money is, or who knows, right? You're slowly kind of evolving as you go along.
Absolutely. No, we definitely think, hardware is hard is the ironic pun that has been said to me since 2019. And they're not wrong. Hardware is extraordinarily difficult, and there's a bunch of different analogies you can use. In a gold rush, sell the axes, don't go be a miner, and that's kind of there's a bunch of different things that kind of we took and learned along the journey that got us to this point. And I think if we're looking at things from a high level thesis standpoint, there's really three things that we've believed in since day one. One is aggregate efficiency will continue to make the production of a product go to as close as zero as possible. Two is electrification and automation will make last mile delivery costs decline, and also the proliferation of these hubs, these kiosks will essentially increase delivery efficiency. And our thesis is, if we can give everybody access to these incredible unattended automated infrastructure, we might have something. So that's kind of that. Those have been our guiding principles since day one. And when we launched kind of the software component of our business 2 years ago, we immediately saw traction. And it's funny, as you make your pivots, you start to understand what works very early on and what doesn't work. And when we launched the software component of our business, me and my co-founder looked at each other right away. We're like, oh, we got something real. We got something real and scalable, and something big. So
Yeah, when you do it enough times, you're like, that smells right. That smells
Exactly.
okay. That I got all the boon signs are there, right? You're like, okay, well, there's really a bottomless amount of customers. they all can pay this way, and
Yeah.
they're all used to paying this way, and it's really solving a huge problem. And you kind of like steer the boat that way for a bit. It gets easier and easier and easier. And yeah, congratulations. We are out of time. I would like to talk to you more. Let's do it again real soon. And congratulations.
Hey, Scott, I appreciate you having me on. This is incredible, and I'll gladly come back anytime you'll have me.
Excellent. Thank you.